Hey guys, welcome back. This is Cade, joined by Andrew, and today we are going to be reviewing Godzilla from 1954. Andrew, what are some of your biggest pros that you have with the movie?
I would say my biggest pro is simply just how do I want to put this? Not is the concept of the movie, kind of taking the idea and the paranoia of a post nuclear weapon world and putting that paranoia into a physical manifestation, in this case, a giant reptilian monster. And it's a perfect fit, especially since this did come out in 1954. Japan was still very much in the process of rebuilding after the dropping the atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So it would make sense for them to come up with a concept that kind of reflects that fear and paranoia of could it happen again, and the wide scale devastation that comes from using nuclear weapons. And in this case, they just chose to use a giant reptilian lizard that also happens to poison everything he comes into contact with because, again, Godzilla is highly radioactive, so it makes everybody sick afterwards. What about you, kid?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think the concept is definitely great. Another thing that I really like about this movie, I like how it utilizes Godzilla as a character. What I mean by that is I like how Godzilla doesn't have a huge amount of screen time in the movie, and this relates to what we talked about in our Jaws review. So I think that not showing Godzilla constantly throughout the movie is a great way to make the buildup for when he causes all the destruction even greater. Also, by not having him in the movie all that much, I think it really adds to the element of the unknown, which I think makes him even more terrifying. So I credit the team behind this movie for how they utilized Godzilla's screen time, and it really helped benefit the story, in my opinion.
Yeah, it really does. And again, like we talked about in our Jaws review, less is more. Work when it's done well works really, really well. And this is one of those examples. Because honestly, and I'll talk about the special effects in a minute because I do consider that a pro still. But yeah, the more you were going to show Godzilla in this movie, the less impactful he would feel, especially towards the climax when he does, destroy Tokyo and then gets let out into the ocean and gets destroyed with the oxygen destroyer or the O2 destroyer. I can't remember what they actually call it in this one because they've called it both and throughout the series. But yeah, this is just a again, less is more when it's done right is very effective, and this is definitely one of those examples.
Yeah, absolutely. But since we just brought up the effects, do you want to get into that?
I do. Now, again, this movie is from 1954, but looking at the effects from 1954, yes, they do look a little jank in places, but honestly, to me, they have such a charm to them from that time period. Like, I think of this, the fact that you can clearly tell it's a guy in a giant lizard suit. You can see the miniatures of the trains and the helicopters getting destroyed, and like the little miniature Oda Island getting decimated. I don't know. It just all feels very charming and quaint. I think is the best way to put it, just because there's clearly a lot of love and attention put into it because it is probably a pretty difficult process to do. But I don't know. I just find it charming. To me, it reminds me of like Jason and the Argonauts with the stop motion animation stuff. I just love that kind of special effects. Maybe it's just because I'm so too damn desensitized to really bad CGI nowadays that seeing actual practical effects, even if they do look a little, they show their age a little bit. I just still like it. I don't know if that's the best way of putting it.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you mean. And in terms of the creation of Godzilla, I really think that the production team behind this movie did really great, and especially for the 1950s. And for anyone who might not know, the original plan was to use stop motion to create Godzilla. But unfortunately, they didn't have quite the budget and they did have deadlines because if they did use stop motion, then it would have taken the movie several years. So they were forced to use suitmation. With that in mind, do you think that the movie would have had the same impact if they used stop motion? Or do you think going with suitmation was the better idea?
I'm gonna say probably Suitmation was probably the better idea because I think it benefited more from being in black and white with Suitmation because there's less chances to make out the details that kind of ruin the immersion, which is an issue that some of the later Godzilla movies have when the budgets get progressively smaller and smaller and the costumes get progressively worse and worse. And yeah, just sometimes, yeah, no, I think Suitmation was the right way to go just because again, I think it's plus you get more fluid movements with Suitmation. Because again, as much as I love stop motion, sometimes it does look a little choppy in places. And when you're dealing with a creature like Godzilla that's got some very complicated movements, it's 360 degrees, it's moving its arms, it's moving its head, it's rearing back and roaring. That's a lot of animation to do. Not only would that take a lot of time, but that also again is a lot of complex movements, which is pretty hard to do with stop motion and making it look good without taking an age. So yeah, I think Suitmation was the right choice on this one.
Yeah, and I think another pro I have in this movie, just piggybacking off of what you were just talking about, I love how it's in black and white. And I know that most movies back then were black and white, but this is something that I think works really well with a movie like Godzilla. I think the fact that it is in black and white sort of adds this kind of unique element and essence to it. And when I look at some other movies that are in black and white, such as older movies like this one, like if we look at Psycho, which we'll be reviewing soon, or if you look at more recent movies like The Lighthouse, which was also in black and white, those are movies and stories that I think work better as black and white films rather than colored films because I think it really matches with the tones of those movies. And I think black and white fits with a movie like Godzilla.
Yeah, I agree.
But any other pros that you have?
The music in this movie is really good. Godzilla's movies, even up to today, all seem to have really good orchestral scores, and this movie is no different. It's got that instantly iconic Godzilla theme, and yeah, sound effects are pretty good too. For a movie made in the '50s, not really too much to add. Just I really like the music, and I really think sound effects are done super well in this.
Yeah, I totally agree. But why don't we get into our cons of this movie? Do you want to start?
I will start. I need to start off by saying that again, this movie is 70 years old, so it is obviously going to be show its age a little bit. But there is some parts of this movie where it is a little it definitely shows its age in places. Like for me, the first, shall we say, first act of this movie, it feels really, really choppy and like really, really all over the place because scenes don't really end. They just stop and all of a sudden we're on to something else in a completely different location with completely different characters. Like it takes, again, I think it takes to like the start of the second act to like really establish like, okay, this is the small group of characters we're following throughout the rest of the movie. Whereas the first third of it, it's like, okay, who are these people? Who are these people? Who are these people? Okay, we're here, we're here, we're here, we're here. It's just very, very choppy. And I'm sure that I almost get the feeling that was maybe done intentionally to kind of match the chaos of the emergence of Godzilla in the first act. But it's a little hard to follow in the first act.
Yeah, I think that's one of my biggest cons with the movie. I also have issues with the pacing in this film, specifically during the first half, because while I do like that Godzilla isn't present throughout the entire movie, I think that the first half kind of takes a little while to really get things moving and feel like things are really happening. So, yeah, every time I watch this movie, while I still think it's a good movie overall, yeah, the pacing is always kind of an issue with me, especially during the first half, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. Since again, I had basically the same issue. Only other con I really have for this movie, again, you got to take its age into effect here, but I really don't care about any of the human characters in this movie because again, it takes to the second act to establish like, okay, here's the group you're actually supposed to care about, and even by the end, I really just don't.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. But tell you what, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give this movie?
It is still it's an enjoyable movie. Started one of the longest running franchises in film, shall we say. Obviously, very important movie. I'll give it an 8. Again, I do like it. It just, again, it's made from a different time and we're looking at it from a lens of 2024.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. And yeah, while it is a good movie and I like it, yeah, I think I will have to give it an 8. I'll give it an 8 out of 10. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter, and we will see you later.